nobody knew what a homosexual looked like in the 1960s, or almost no one. And he said, if you want a job, you have to look like you want a job, which meant that in the early protests in 1965, when you see these pictures in front of the White House, the men are in coat and tie, the women are in skirts and blouses and heels, and the signs are all coordinated. And he was attacked. Someone said to him, "You can't market gay people like toothpaste." And he said, "No, you can. You can do exactly that."
Want to listen to this Ivory Tower Boiler Room or True Crime in Academia episode ad-free? Head on over to our Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room, to listen to all of our podcast episodes without any ads. You get access to our video episodes, our bonus episodes, and even more exclusive content, including merchandise. It only starts at $5 a month, so head on over to our Patreon. Again, it's patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And while you're at it, you know what would be such a help is if you could rate and review the Ivory Tower Boiler Room on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And make sure that you follow us and share out our podcast to all of your friends. It truly does help. And I want to thank you all. It means so much that you're listening to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm so excited to shout out the Gay and Lesbian Review, who is helping to sponsor the ITBR podcast. For all of you out there, the Gay and Lesbian Review is a bi-monthly magazine where you can discover new things about gay and lesbian literature, history, and culture. And the GL Review publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies, and a number of special features, such as artist profiles and their popular art memo column. Each issue of the magazine brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought-provoking articles focused on a unifying theme. For example, their September-October issue centers on the theme Cracking the Closet. So, starting in the 19th century, a number of artists and writers found ways to crack the closet by expressing their sexuality between the lines or in the interstices of their work. For example, Ignacio Darnad, who is a friend of the ITBR podcast, he's been on our show, writes all about illustrator J.C. Leyendecker, whose work for Ivory Soap and Arrow Collars gave him plenty of opportunities to draw pictures of well-dressed and at times scantily dressed American men. And you also can find an article by Vernon Rosario, who has been on the podcast, and he talks about the quest for sex in the Middle Ages. So, to subscribe, visit glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Click subscribe. So on their website, go all the way over to the right-hand side and you'll see the button subscribe. Click subscribe and enter the promo code ITBR50 because you're getting 50% off your subscription to the print or digital edition of the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine. I can't wait for you all to have your copy of the Gay and Lesbian Review magazine, and make sure that you take a picture when your magazine arrives or when you're reading it online and tag the GL Review on Instagram and ITBR, and we'll share it out in our stories. Enjoy your reading, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'm really excited because I was joking with my guest that, well, I wasn't joking that he's iconic, but he found that humorous. But he is someone who has basically been in the orbit here on the podcast since we had Michaela Grifo on, who was part of the Gay Liberation Front, Thomas Wall, who was part of the first Queer Studies Conference, Vernon Rosario. I feel that there's been a lot who are part of the 1970s to 80s history, but I'm so happy to actually be joined with Eric Marcus, who is first the founder and host of Making Gay History, a podcast that I've been binging while at the beach. And he knows I've been tanning and taking in the sun rays and swimming as I'm listening to his new coming out series, which we'll definitely talk about. But he also is the writer, of course, of Making Gay History, but it first was called Making History in 1992. So I'll have to ask him, why did the name change to Making Gay History? He also wrote Why Suicide, Breaking the Surface. Um, he wrote the #1 New York Times bestselling autobiography of Olympic diving champion Greg Louganis, who actually recently was on my friend Rachel Yucatel's podcast. So
Oh, that's great.
that's yes, yes. Her podcast is called Misunderstood, and she interviewed him. And I know that you also wrote another, I thought, sports. Robbie, didn't you do Robbie's
I
autobiography?
I've written several
Okay,
sports autobiographies, including Robbie Rogers' autobiography,
okay.
also Rudy Galindo's autobiography.
Okay. He also is the co-producer of Those Who Were There, a podcast drawn from the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies. He's the founder and chair emeritus of the Stonewall 50 Consortium, which was such an amazing organization. And he's a founding board member of what I can't wait for, the American LGBTQ plus museum. I can't wait for it actually to open. And I'm
Yeah,
sure
me
that's
too.
going to be, yes, a fabulous party. I hope I get invited to it. And first, Eric, it just means so much that you are here in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and just sharing space with you is incredible.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be on your show. How did you come to name your? I know you're interviewing me, but forgive me. How did you come to name your podcast the Ivory Tower Boiler Room?
Well, so it's this metaphor of myself with an academic persona meets the everyday life or the basement level of the artistic process. So
Uh-huh.
how does the sausage get made? So
Yeah, not in the Ivory Tower. It gets made in the basement.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like this really nice mixing of the darkness of the basement with the beauty and glory of an ivory tower fairy tale. Like
Yes.
the
Yes.
two
I
worlds
got it.
meet somewhere.
I got it.
Um, yeah, so no, thanks for that. But since I just got my PhD and I now always call myself an unapologetic gay scholar, I really find it fascinating just your career of publishing, but also in your recent podcasts. Like, let's start with coming out in the '70s, if that's okay, because I feel
Sure.
it gives
Sure.
us a lot more of who you are as a person, where your publications don't necessarily,
Yeah, you wouldn't
it
know.
wasn't necessarily a memoirist style.
No, no. In fact, when I did the original Making Gay History, which was called Making History in its first edition, I was very clear about leaving myself out of it. I very much wanted to be the omniscient journalist, letting other people tell their stories. But of course, behind the scenes, you have a hand in how a book is organized and how you characterize the history and how you contextualize it. So even though I'm not personally in it, I'm very, my hand is I hope invisible, but very much present. Uh, but in the recent season of Making Gay History, which was called Coming of Age during the 1970s, it is very memoir-esque. My experience of growing up as a gay kid in the 1970s, set against the backdrop of the what became the gay liberation phase of the gay and lesbian civil rights movement. So yes, and I wound up talking about things that I never expected to talk about in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, yeah,
And there's beautiful, just what you do so well is this archive audio. Like I remember specifically, you have a lot with Sylvia Rivera and
yes,
Star,
yes.
um, the organization that she founded, that it really nicely mixes with you providing the background, but then actually hearing from, even, I'm going to forget her name, but she was the founder of PFLAG, the parents
Oh yes, of
organization.
course, Jean Manford, Jean and Morty and her son Morty Manford. Yes, and I never it never occurred to me when I was young that how iconic Jean was and Morty because of their efforts in founding PFLAG 50 years ago. And then my mother became very involved in PFLAG. And then only years after her death, I learned that my mother co-founded PFLAG Queens with Jean Manford. But my mother
Wow.
didn't tell me because I had scolded her once about the fact that this was my work and my world and what was she doing messing in it. But I really wish she had told me that she was a co-founder of Flag Queens. I comments she's been dead for 14 years when I learned that.
Oh, wow. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming that Flag Queens is still going on.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, was this when the LGBT network is pretty new, right? In recent history on Long Island and Queens.
Yes,
Okay.
relatively, yeah. But Flag Queens goes back probably 20 years, maybe more. I have so lost track of time now that I'm an old person. It all gets squished together.
Well, did the genesis of making history, specifically for everyone out there, it's making history, the struggle for gay and lesbian equal rights, 1945 to 1990. Was this a genesis that started when you went to Vassar for your undergrad or when you went for your master's at Columbia? Or it had
Neither.
nothing to do with academia?
Nothing to do with academia. I was working at CBS News at the time in 1988 when a friend of mine who was an editor at Harper and Row, now Harper Collins, they merged and changed
Mhm.
names, called and asked if I would consider writing a proposal for an oral history of what was then called the gay and lesbian civil rights movement. And I said to him, I'm not an academic. I know nothing about this history. Why are you asking me? And he said, well, I liked how you did dialogue in your first book, The Male Couple's Guide to Living Together, which was published in 1988. And I want a book that the general audience can read, a book like Studs Terkel's working in. I was very familiar with Studs Terkel's work. He's a famous oral historian, had a radio show in Chicago. He's long dead, although he did interview me for his show in Chicago, which was, talk about an icon. He was an extraordinary oral historian. And it just happened to be at a moment when I got that call when I was thinking about what to do at CBS. I was there on a 6-month contract. I was negotiating a 4-year contract. So they wanted me to stay on as a segment producer for the CBS morning show, which was then called CBS This Morning with Harry Smith and Kathleen Sullivan. Kathleen, who I adored, who brought me over from ABC, from Good Morning America after I got fired from Good Morning America. And I hated CBS. That was one problem. The other problem was that I really wanted to be on the other side of the camera. I wanted to be a correspondent. And there was nobody who was out and gay on national network news, cable, anywhere in the country. And so I asked for a meeting with a CBS executive who was a graduate from Vassar. She was 10 years older than I am. And she was head of talent. And that's what they call the on-air people, talent. Whether they were talented or not, they were called talent. And it was a very uncomfortable conversation because she really didn't want to answer me when I asked whether they put an openly gay person on camera. And it was too late by that. I couldn't go back in the closet. I didn't want to go back in the closet. And my publisher had very helpfully sent a copy of the Male Couple's Guide to every single person at CBS News in February of '88, not long after I started at CBS. I came into work one morning and the book was on every desk in the office.
Oh, wow.
And one of my colleagues, who was just terrific, another producer, a booker, she said, can I ask a question? I said, of course. She said, who plays the husband and who plays the wife? And I knew her husband was a CBS executive and she had a big job at CBS This Morning. I said, well, who plays the husband, who plays the wife in your relationship? Stopped her cold. But usually when people are asking about who plays the husband, who plays the wife, they want to know who's on top in bed.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, they're asking sexual
Yeah, I've
positions
been
that
asked
they
that. Yeah, I've been
no,
asked that
and then they try
question.
to collapse it into gender ideology.
Yes.
And yeah, it's very Dan Savage. I feel Dan Savage does a lot of that cultural work of
Yeah.
um, addressing the heterosexual public and shocking them. Uh,
Yes. Well, I try not to. I'm so not Dan Savage. I'm not good at shocking, but I am. I got very good at asking people in gentle ways questions that would make them question what they had just asked me, or stop them in their tracks so that have to think about what they're actually asking. Um, I left CBS to write that proposal. My then partner and I discussed whether we could afford for me to leave CBS. I was reluctant to leave because of the prestige of working at CBS News, which it was then very prestigious, especially having come from the J School at Columbia, the journalism school. Because there was no guarantee they were going to buy the book at Harper. He asked for a proposal. He said, I'm likely to buy it. I can't guarantee it. But long story short, they bought it. And the reason we called it Making History and not Making Gay History is we were concerned about the capacity of the sales force at Harper and Row to sell a book with the word gay in the title. And also we're concerned that bookstores would not place the book face out if it had the word gay in the title. 10 years later, we did a new edition in 2002, and the world had changed so dramatically in 10 years, changed the title to Making Gay History, nobody batted an eyelash.
And there's the pride flag is on the cover in the new edition. I mean, very visible.
It's very gay. But to give you just an example of how things evolved during that time, when the Male Couples Guide was published in 1988, I wanted an image of two guys on the cover. They wouldn't do it. It was just all text.
Wow.
Second edition, it was just hands, two hands clasped. It was my hands and my late ex. And the third edition, they had two guys walking on the beach, shot from behind, in jeans rolled up, to their knees, and it was kind of sweet. Yeah. So that was just over a period of 15 years. So that's how I could mark the changes. But in academic terms, so I know that's your realm. On the back of books, I'm sure you've seen this, there's shelving information. It says, American Studies, American History, Gay Studies, whatever. When the second edition of Making Gay History was published in 2002, I insisted that we have shelving information on the back that said American History / Gay Studies. The previous edition, the original, only said Gay Studies. But my feeling was this is part of American history. So it was never shelved with American history. Only Gay Studies, alternative lifestyles. It's like, I remember asking some bookstore owners, what do you mean by alternative lifestyles? Because, is that yoga, meditation, vegetarianism? Because the only thing under alternative lifestyles was homosexuals. I insisted that we have American History / Gay Studies. I saw the page. I asked for all the proofs, so I saw the cover proof, and the cover proof had American History / Gay Studies. The book was published. It said Gay Studies. Somebody cut American History from the back of the book. I don't know who did it. No one would cop to it, and it was really disappointing. That's 20 years ago, 21 years ago. Things have changed considerably now, and I don't think anyone would argue that LGBTQ history isn't American history.
No, well, and you set the stage or the page, so to speak, for so much LGBTQ history books. I mean, I'm thinking of A Queer History of the United States
There are so many history
by
books.
Michael Bronsky, right?
Yeah.
But there's been so many. I think Lillian Faderman has a book out.
Well, Lillian and I had we were reviewed on the cover of the New York Times Book Review at the same time. She did her book on it was something Twilight Lovers. I've forgotten the first part of the title. I adore Lillian. She's done incredible history work.
Oh, about lesbian lovers.
Yes. So we were reviewed jointly on the cover of the New York Times Book Review in 1992. So yeah, and I wasn't the first. Jonathan Ned Katz did his wonderful Gay American History book years before my book. It's nice to think. I hadn't actually thought about this before. That it might have opened the door to lots of other histories.
Well, and that all of you, what's interesting is there's with the LGBTQ historians that not everyone, it comes from academia, but there's I'm thinking of Jonathan Ned Katz. He's not trained in LGBTQ studies or history at a university, but all the archive footage he even got of visuals. And I think of his illustrations and photographs from the 19th century of same-sex desire that anyone who is invested or interested and you arriving at it from the oral history approach, that anyone is welcome to the table to bring this to light.
Yes. Jim Kepner, who founded an archive in Los Angeles, it's half of the one archive at the USC libraries now. When I interviewed Jim, who was he worked at a milk box factory when he was young, but he was obsessed with gay history and had this incredible archive. I interviewed him in his broken down cottage in Los Angeles that was packed to the ceiling with stuff. And all that stuff is now at the One Archives at the USC libraries. And when I first encountered the One Archives, it was in a basement of a mansion in Hancock Park in LA. Dor Legg was the founder of that archive. Boy, was he eccentric, but also not an academic. But they created the first gay studies program at the One Institute in LA. in the 1950s or 60s. It's in the podcast. I don't always remember the history. I found I was never really welcomed by the LGBTQ academics because
Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, say,
uh-uh
not to single out, but say a Martin Duberman or
no,
like
not
there's a
welcomed by that
certain
world.
cachet.
Yeah,
Mhm.
no, I was never invited in to that world.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I am so excited to be talking about Broadview Press. You might be asking, what is Broadview Press, Andrew? Broadview is an independent academic publisher in the humanities that produces high quality, pedagogically useful books for use in university and college classrooms. They publish in the humanities, mainly English studies, writing, philosophy, and history, just to name a few genres. And recently, I had on Dr. Jason Holt, who wrote all about the philosophy of sport. And what better summer episode than to talk about what happens when a philosopher dissects the beautiful aesthetics of sporting culture? In the spring, I had on doctors Kyle Stedman and Tanya Rodriguez to talk about what is sound writing, how to make audio projects in the college classroom, how to even have your students create podcasts. And then in the winter, I had on Dr. Jeffrey Weinstock. He talked about analyzing pop culture. Yes, I even sneak in some Real Housewives questions and how to teach composition and make it fun. He uses this whole metaphor about being a mad scientist in this gothic lab. And in the fall, I had on Dr. Ann Stevens, and she talked about literary theory and criticism. And yes, the university season is upon us. So, what better way to talk about the college classroom than to actually understand what is literary theory? That's a wonderful episode for all of you out there who teach literary studies. I love Broadview Press. Make sure you use their exclusive code. It's Ivory Tower on broadviewpress.com. You get 20% off all, all Broadview Press publications. Okay, until the next Broadview Press interview. And now back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
But as one of my friends who worked in academia said, I had a lot more freedom to write what I wrote in the way that I wrote it because I'm not an academic. So the Male Couples Guide is not an academic book. There were no footnotes in Making Gay History because I hate footnotes, but I really should have had them. We've made up for that with the podcast because with our podcast episodes, each episode is accompanied by episode notes with all kinds of references and additional information and links that people can use if they want to dig deeper. But so I've had greater freedom because I'm not an academic. I do have a couple of master's degrees, but not in LGBTQ history, not even close.
Yeah, but you're a public scholar. I mean, that's where, like, you even being in this space, I see myself as a public academic. And I will say that, like, the millennial, my generation, we look to the work that those who weren't necessarily quote unquote trained in academia, we're looking at all sources. So
Yeah,
I do think we're now in a space. I don't know if you see this too, Eric, but I feel that LGBTQ studies specifically needs the academic and the public to meet together, which is
absolutely.
what your podcast does.
There aren't enough academics to cover it all. There are so many citizen historians around the country who have been in touch with me about how do I do what you did, but do it in my community and tell that story and create an oral history archive. Because every city and town in the country has its own story, its own history, its own LGBTQ history. So I think there's more than enough room in the space for people who are academic and come at it from the academic system, which you do, and for people like me who are citizen historians who fell into it accidentally. And I got lucky because at the time that I started my work, most of the people who founded our movement was still alive. And it was almost as if the dinosaurs still walk the earth. I got to interview the founders of the Managing Society and the Daughters of Bilitis and the Society for Individual Rights and, go down the list.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, especially because those who are listening to this can listen to Michaela Grifo speak about being part of the radical lesbians,
Mm-hmm.
and like the fracturing that she was talking a lot about, the fracturing that she started to see, especially now in recent years. I mean, she has this moment about where are the lesbians, or like feeling that some feel that they're not being represented in
Yeah.
the LGBTQ movement broadly. Um, and she was, very open about that activist spirit. Like I think of when you hear Sylvia Rivera's speech in your episode, it is just so or not Sylvia Rivera's speech. Sylvia Rivera had a friend you talk about who was actually a teacher.
Oh my goodness. Yes, BB Scarpinati.
Phoebe.
Sorry,
No,
Scarpinato,
so
BB Scarpi. Oh, that's an amazing piece of tape. At City Hall in 1971. Yeah, these were. We go through cycles. There are moments of that call for that kind of activism and that kind of speaking, that kind of confrontation. And then there are moments where people work more effectively from the inside, and it goes back and forth over time. I've now lived long enough to see multiple cycles of it, and also interview people who lived through earlier cycles of it. But that moment after Stonewall was one of those moments. It was a galvanizing moment when people really poured into the streets and into city halls around the country to get legislation passed, and it was fueled by young people. I'm thinking of now of David. Does David Hogue pronounce his name? David Hogue, the kid
oh
who
yes, with gun right. I'm
the
like
gun rights group.
protection for gun rights,
Yeah,
and
yeah, and he just launched it
after after what happened
at
with
Parkland High
Parkland.
School.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes.
in Florida, and he's just launched a new national organization for young people to get involved in getting elected to state legislatures. Um, it's almost always this way that it comes from young people who arrive in the world and are not happy with the way things are, and see a path to change things. And usually there's a trigger of some kind, as
Yeah.
there was in 1970 and 69 with the Stonewall Uprising.
Or a Greta Thunberg, for example, for climate change, like her being seen as the face. Even that, well,
Yes,
Jane Fonda, I would say though, Jane Fonda and her, there
right.
is a lot of intergenerational work happening in these spaces.
Yes,
Or
yeah,
even what's happening now with SAG-AFTRA. That's a very intergenerational movement, with Fran
yes.
Drescher being the vocal, president, spokesperson. Um,
I went to high school with Fran Drescher.
did you? Oh yeah, she's from Flushing, isn't she?
She went to Hillcrest High School, and I used to talk like that. No, I didn't have a laugh quite as dramatic as that. I never did. And my accent was probably a little lighter, but I worked very hard to get rid of my accent because I thought it would ruin my career. And it really has worked very well for her. She's amazing. She is just amazing, and people underestimate her. Um, I
Yes.
think
Like I
based
don't
on
think yeah, they didn't realize how much activism she had already been doing with political bills.
yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know
She's a
I
tough
have a lot
cookie.
of hope.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
well, and I think something that, you do bring up a lot in your recent episodes with your series of the 1970s, but even just with all of the different activists, for all of you out there, like, beginning with Making Gay History, the podcast, but I know coming from your book, you do chart Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, the key activists, like going through each of their
Hmm.
profiles, so to speak.
Yeah.
But how they did not agree with each other at a lot of um,
No, 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 no.
meeting points, that there was a lot of fracturing. I even think of Larry Kramer and the way that he was actually villainized by a lot of gay men in the community.
Well,
Um,
yes, there's always been fracturing. There have been moments when people have been forced to come together, as they did when things were really bad in the early days in the 1950s. They were compelled to work together. But I remember Barbara Giddings saying to me, Barbara, who was very involved with the Daughters of Bilitis, was the editor of the Ladder magazine. She said there was a lot of antagonism toward the men because of their bathroom habits. They got
mhm,
arrested in bathrooms for having sex, and it reflected badly on the women. And the men often treated the women the way men treated women in those days, even though they were gay. And then there were splits between the masculine presenting men and the feminine presenting men.
mhm.
Martin Block, who was the editor of One magazine, said to me, this is in the early 50s, he said some people drank tea with their little pinkies out, and some men drank tea with their little pinkies in. And Some men couldn't stand the swishes and didn't want them coming to meetings. And he said, I'm prejudiced against everyone. So there have always been splits. Sexuality is not, we all have it in common, but it isn't something that necessarily means that everything else about our lives line up. We are compelled to work together, the LGBTQ communities, because we are demonized. Right now, trans people demonized more than anyone else. But in the old days, when I was young, it was plain old gay men who were, as you know from our recent season of the podcast, we were called recruiters because you can't reproduce, you recruit.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You bring in the parallel of today's society with the whole grooming concept and how this is not new. Like grooming goes back centuries. I mean, like
goes back forever.
Yes, that there's a queer influence that's going to overtake the general public, almost as if it's invasion of the body snatchers.
Right. Well, and homosexuality is so terrible that if you try it once, you'll have to do it for the rest of your life. That was the case for me. Once I discovered it, there was no going back. No going back. I was recently filmed for an activation for Verizon, for the phone company, during Pride, and the hair and makeup person asked me as they were setting up. She said, "Are you ready to be groomed?" And boy, did I laugh. It turns out she's a lesbian from the South, very religious family. Her family didn't accept her and her wife. But I just loved, she said, in fact, she said her father said something to her about, using that word grooming. He said, well, grooming is what I do. So I always say that I often say gay men have been obsessed with grooming, at least some gay men, grooming themselves. And that we don't have to groom young people to become gay. They just do it all by themselves.
Well, yeah, there's that excellent point in one of your recent episodes where there's I forget who says it, but during a debate with a Democrat candidate or a Democrat, candidate, who wants to represent the bill for gay rights, that the audience of the LGBTQ audience has to educate him on, well, we didn't have out gay teachers, so how did we all become gay?
Right.
Like if you're saying that there's some kind of influence study, there's an influence of having to mirror this behavior. Why would you be afraid if there's still gay people?
And so much of it now is done cynically, that the politicians who have been promoting this idea of grooming and influence and all the rest, they know better. But they also know that there's a segment of the population that doesn't know better and is fearful. And so they use this as a political issue. And the reason they're using trans people now is that most people don't know someone trans. So it's easy to demonize people you don't know. And the most vulnerable people, of course, are trans kids. And so they're the easiest target. What the anti-trans folks don't realize or haven't come to understand yet is they are fucking with the parents. So all these trans kids have parents, and parents are fierce. And we know from the history of PFLAG that PFLAG, once galvanized, is a force to be reckoned with. The new president of PFLAG has a trans kid. She's the first president of PFLAG to have a trans kid. And I wouldn't want to get in her way. She looks like she's out of central casting for a Republican from Orange County from the 1980s. And she does live in Southern California and really looks the part, but don't mess with her. So I'm looking forward to the growth of the backlash against the backlash.
Well, and there's already, I've been seeing on TikTok, parents with trans kids who've moved out of Florida. Who have the privilege. Because again, I think, right, we get into a conversation about privilege and state privilege and policies, and even how there are those who are Republican who are okay with those who are wealthy, gay or lesbian people, but they're not okay with transgender people. Well, so it's almost trying to put us against each other.
Oh, yeah. And there are gay Republicans, like the log cabin Republicans, who said, why aren't the Republicans going after the left liberal gay people, and not us nice gay Republicans? What they don't understand is but I compare this to, I grew up in a neighborhood of mostly, well, some German Jews, but a lot of Eastern European Jews. And the German Jews were not so fond of the Eastern European Jews, not at the turn of the century anyway, the turn of the 20th century, not the recent turn, that they blamed the great unwashed coming from Eastern Europe for a rise in anti-Semitism, because the German Jews were the nice Jews, and the middle class and upper middle class Jews, the educated Jews, and the ones coming from the shtetls in Eastern Europe were the bad Jews. So, you know, every group does this to themselves, and the log cabin Republicans seem not to understand that if they're going to take the drag queens away and take the trans kids away and take people like you and me away, they're coming for the Republican gays too. They're not protected.
Yeah, well, it's kind of that shtick. I don't even like to give him a lot of airtime, but Milo,
Oh yeah, whatever
you
it
know who I'm
is.
talking about.
Yeah,
Yes, he just goes on a rant, and
yeah.
again, it's very tokenizing, and then the Republicans can claim, but look, here's a gay man who says everything
Right,
that we validated.
right.
Um,
And there'll always be people like that, and I've always been. I wished I had included more people like that in my book. I have one gay Republican in my book, the original Making Gay History. We did an episode on him last year, Bob Bauman, who was had lots of kids, was devout Catholic and secretly gay and an alcoholic, and then got caught and then lost his job in Congress. I'm actually very fond of him. He's in his mid 80s now. It feels like we have been through the wars, but he's still a Republican. Although he's not a Republican, he doesn't. I don't think he votes Republican anymore. But I
is he a
didn't.
George Santos type of
Oh
Republican?
my God, no! Oh my God, is he your district on Long Island?
No, no, no. He's Nassau County. I'm in
Uh-huh.
Suffolk. Yeah, no, he's the good old, I think, Hicksville and that area of Long
Uh-huh.
Island. They get to claim him.
He's a seriously disturbed person, no question about that. But we've also met gay people like that who are become so expert at lying because we're taught to lie as gay people. When you're young, you hide. And those who have mental health issues, as I'm sure he must, he's an extreme version of boy. I can think of people as I grew up who were like that, who created whole personas.
Yeah.
Um,
But how interesting, though, now, instead of trying to throw him out because he's gay, the Republicans are clamoring to just keep him because of
they need the vote.
they need the vote. Yeah, it's very,
It's
yeah,
crazy.
that's what I was going to say. How do you weigh in, like, if you had to return to the male couple's guide, or even, well, wait, I just wanted to ask, with the male couple's guide, had the joys of gay sex been published yet?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The joint gay
Because
sex
I
book.
remember that was a very revolutionary text of its time with just
Yeah.
illustrations, or this is how
Oh
you
my
have anal
God.
sex.
Yes. I looked at that book in an aisle of a bookstore. Um, I would never have bought that book. Oh my God. No, the male couples guide came a little later, but it was the first guide for male couples. I thought it was a rather innocuous book, but it was the first. And so I got a lot of attention. I did a ton of interviews simply because it was a guide for male couples. I had a chapter on sex, but in those days I joked that I was very good at taking the sex out of homosexual. Um, and I dressed the part. I wore, blue button down shirt and a blazer and the whole business. I figured, I didn't speak with my hands. I tried to be as butch as I could, so that my message was not lost, because people would look at me and think he's a fag. So I did my journalist drag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were kind of part of that, right? In the 1960s, what was the gay men who formed the
Oh,
respectability?
the Mattachine Society, and
Yeah, they were
it
a
was
little more white collar.
well, it was very considered. Frank Kameny wanted to brand gay people and he was right to do it when he did it. Nobody knew what a homosexual looked like in the 1960s, or almost no one. And he said, if you want a job, you have to look like you want a job, which meant that in the early protests in 1965, when you see these pictures in front of the White House, the men are in coat and tie, the women are in skirts and blouses and heels, and the signs are all coordinated. And he was attacked. Someone said to him, "You can't market gay people like toothpaste," and he said, "No, you can. You can do exactly that." He had the slogan "Gay is good," and those protests were very effective and appropriate at the time. Things changed very quickly. by the
Well,
late
especially in
60s.
the 1970s. I just had
Well,
Thomas Wall on, who
uh,
talked about going to gay porn cinemas and like seeing Boys in the Sand at, I think it was the 55th Street Playhouse. There was
uh,
Studio 54. I mean, I'm sure you remember
I
this
was I was at
counterculture.
I was at
Yeah.
studio.
Like
The
that
work.
to me was nostalgic. Or when I think of what it was like to be gay, I just try to imagine that partying, dancing lifestyle.
My favorite dancing place was, and we didn't include this in the coming of age during the 1970s. We didn't include as much of my memoirs as I think I would have liked. We just couldn't because there was so much to include.
You can do
Um,
another series.
yeah, no. Oh my God, was it a heavy
Eric's
lift?
memoirs. I can see it. I can see it.
My favorite place was the Ice Palace on West 57th Street. It was downstairs.
Oh.
It was a fantastic disco, and it attracted a great crowd. And I met Don Miller from Texas at the Ice Palace in the late 1970s. And Last Dance was the song that we danced to.
Mm.
And then we took the subway, the F train, back to Jamaica Estates, Queens, where I was living at the time. And there he was in his cowboy boots and his cowboy hat from Texas on the subway with me going back to Queens. And it was great. It was pre-AIDS.
LGBT stories are universal, but each one speaks to the individual heart and soul of the writer telling it. Do you have a story to tell? Or have you been moved by an LGBT book, film, painting, television show, or other form of media? Then the Gay and Lesbian Review wants to hear from you. The GNLR believes in bringing awareness to queer art and artists through reviews, commentary, and thought pieces in which the author relates their personal lives to a particular piece of art, a novel, a movie. In addition to the print magazine, the GNLR also publishes articles on its blog. So you can see all of this on glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Remember, you get 50% off your subscription of the GL Review magazine when you use the promo code ITBR50. That's 50% off your print or digital subscription when you use promo code ITBR50. To learn more about submitting an article for the GNLR, visit their writer's guidelines. The link is located at the bottom of their homepage. And if you have any questions, email Stephen Hemrick. That's STEPHEN.HEMRICK at glreview.org. The GNLR and its readers can't wait to see what you have to say. Hi, everyone. This is Andrew, and I am interrupting what I know is such an exciting Ivory Tower Boiler Room episode to tell you all about one of my favorite podcasts. It's called That Old Gay Classic Cinema, and it's hosted by Christian Garcia. Christian is joined with guest co-hosts to talk about classic cinema films that we know and love, and he analyzes them through a queer lens. So he's talked about The Sound of Music, Alfred Hitchcock, The Wizard of Oz, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, and recently Hello, Dolly. I actually was on his first ever episode to talk about my love of The Sound of Music and playing Captain Von Trapp in my high school musical. Then I was joined with Mary DePippi, the host of True Crime in Academia, and our friend Travis Roundtree to talk about Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Mary just had Christian on True Crime in Academia to talk about female poisoners, including the evil queen from Snow White and actual real life female poisoners. So Christian's podcast is the best. You must add it to your listen list. After you listen to this episode, make sure you head over to That Old Gay Classic Cinema on Apple and Spotify. Make sure you follow him on Instagram at That Old Gay Classic Cinema. And he's also on TikTok. Don't forget TikTok. Okay, I can't wait for you all to listen to That Old Gay Classic Cinema. And now back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Hey, Ivory Tower Boiler Room listeners and true crime friends. You've heard me gush over this incredible woman and her beautiful products. I'm talking about Mandy Made It. Mandy makes customized and original crochet and pre-cut goods. They are the perfect, unique, one-of-a-kind gift for literally anyone in your life. And she makes incredible home decor. I still have my pumpkins that I put out every fall. I just love them. Check her out on Instagram at MANDEE Made It, or search Mandy Made It on Facebook. To order, just slide into her DMs, and if you mention the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, you will receive a free personalized gift with your first order. So, go on Instagram and look up at Mandy Made It, and Mandy is spelled MANDEE. Again, her handle is at Mandy Made It, Mandy spelled MANDEE, and order today.
It was for me, as a relatively privileged person, it was a great time to be a gay kid and coming of age. And it was a great time. It's a great time.
Well, and then the
and
80s.
Then it changed. Yeah, and Don Miller has been dead for decades. So,
well, but something I'm feeling right now in our current moment, even though like we've talked about backlash to the LGBTQ community, especially the transgender community being surveilled or the policing.
Yeah.
There also, though, is a hyper, in my opinion, I'm seeing the hyper sexualized liberation in a way. I feel like we maybe are back to the 70s. I don't know if it's because of PrEP. I don't know if it's because like those in my circle were dancing. Barbie also, it's very disco-y. Yes. There's a lot of disco music coming back.
Yes, disco is the best music to dance to. Mm-hmm. If I'm ever in a nursing home, I want that music to sleep by or nap by. I think PrEP has certainly changed things. But as I had a coffee with a young friend who told me about being on PrEP, I said, well, this is before monkeypox. I said, well, what if another virus winds up out there that spread the way that AIDS spread? You didn't know. And then it shows up, and PrEP isn't going to protect you from that. And then monkeypox showed up. The fact is, we're human, and if you're going to be very sexually active, the odds are that if you don't take the normal precautions and condoms and all the rest, that you leave yourself open to infection of some kind at some point. But humans will be humans, and it's great to be in denial, just as people now feel that COVID is over. I've only been out of isolation for 2 days, I might add. I was in isolation for 12 days with COVID, which is why my voice is what it is now. It's if you're young and you want to meet people and you have friends, you want to go out and dance and have a good time, and absolutely, why not? Why not?
Yeah. Well, the best thing with PrEP, because I am on PrEP, is you have to be with your doctor every 3 months. So I am getting tested for everything. I'm getting tested for all of the STIs. So it's not like you just can get PrEP and then it's not like Ozempic in the same analogy, but even with Ozempic, you have to be monitored by your doctor.
Yeah.
It's like PrEP. You can't just take PrEP and then not check back in with your doctor.
Right. And for someone like me of my generation, I was so traumatized I couldn't imagine having unprotected sex that would require PrEP.
Yeah.
Even with my partner.
Yeah. So I think, this is where there's a difference in generational thinking.
Of course.
But I also do feel, I don't want to say, are we making up for
lost
just
time?
The loss of the 80s generation, but I do feel that generations like your generation, my generation, we are now starting, like I see a lot of these intergenerational friendships even when I go to Fire Island, which is what liberates me, is talking to the older generation and having conversations.
Sure. And our experience is different from your experience, and it's interesting. I've had many conversations with younger people about what the AIDS crisis was like. I remember talking with people about what World War II was like when I was a kid, because my parents' generation lived through World War II. It's the way we connect. And we don't have that natural connection among gay people because our parents aren't gay. They can't talk about their experience. So I'm delighted to hear that there's intergenerational conversation in a place like Fire Island and other places where gay people gather. And then my friend, my acquaintance, Wes Enos, has the Generations Project, and Sage does a lot of intergenerational work as well. There's so much to be learned. I had the chance when I was 30 years old to sit next to and in front of all of these older people who were my age and older, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and asked them about their experiences. And it was fascinating. It is so interesting to learn about other people's experiences. And one thing I did learn is that there has always been gay joy. Mm-hmm. No matter how bad the times were, people always found ways to have good times. It was more risky at times, and the stakes were much higher. But people have always managed. There's always been gay joy.
Yeah, well, and that to me is what the emblem is of Studio 54, as just a meaning was to just let loose, and so many cultures came together. I mean, it really was.
Although it was
oh, well, see, I don't know. See, that's the nostalgia. That's the like Donna Summer.
Oh no, yeah. No, the Studio 54 was a horrible place in some ways. It was $15 to get in 1977 when I went.
That's a lot.
A lot of money.
That's probably what now, like $90, $80?
$15. Those 1970s, probably 4 times as much. So $60 or $70, yeah, to get in. And also, you couldn't just walk into Studio 54. There was a bouncer, and he picked out who got in. I went with my friend Kevin Barrell. Not Kevin Barrell. What was Kevin's last name? I can't remember. Kevin died many years ago. It was with Kevin, who was like 6'2" and striking. He had a jaw like your jawline, but even more chiseled. And he was wearing a tuxedo. I borrowed a tuxedo, and we were there with our friend Lisa. It was winter. She was in a coat, and they like the crowd parted as we arrived, and the bouncer pointed to us and asked Kevin who he was with, and Kevin pointed to me, and he pointed to our friend Lisa, and he said, "What's she wearing?" Now, the right answer to that is "fuck you." The wrong answer is to open your jacket and show the bouncer what you're wearing. And he looked her up and down. She was wearing a magnificent red dress and this magnificent gold necklace from her mother. And they swept us in, and it was $15 a person. So while it was a wonderful place, it was a very discriminatory place. So
it was kind of like going to a Broadway show in a way.
Oh, it was much hard. With Broadway show, you can buy a ticket. Anyone can go. But you couldn't. I remember I have another friend from Vassar who wanted to go to Studio 54. I said, "We're not going to get in." And she said, "Well, I want to go." I said, "Well, I'll take you, but we're not going to get in."
Just the exclusivity of it. Well, but that exclusivity, it kind of is interesting, though. Do you feel that, though, it doesn't seem like they were necessarily excluding, though, gay men, or like necessarily they were trying
no. They were
discriminate against sexuality.
They wanted beautiful people. Yeah. They were discriminating against ugly people, and people who didn't look the part. It was really, they were casting the people who were there. The Ice Palace was not like that, so you could, anybody could go. But you still.
So the Ice Palace was the more egalitarian.
Well, it was more, and it was gay men. It was all gay. It was all gay.
Did it have anything to do with the Ice Palace in Cherry Grove on Fire Island?
I'm guessing it was a branch of. Yeah.
Well, and let's talk just a little about Fire Island, because you do have things to say about it. I don't want to reveal everything. I mean, there's some coming out trauma, so to speak, I'll say, or just an experience you have there that's not pleasant.
No, I was taken there when I was 16 years old by a neighbor who was a reverend, who was trying to bring me out of the closet. And it was too soon. And it was way too soon. So Fire Island is beautiful. I have been a number of times. I'll tell you about the second time I was there, and it's not in the memoir, not in the recent season. The second time I went, it was after the first time when I was 16. I didn't go back for I don't know, 4 years, 5 years.
Okay.
I went with a guy I was dating, and got to the house, and everybody was normal. They were a little older. I was probably 20. They were all in their mid-20s to late 20s or early 30s. Get up the next morning, and everyone is in leather. Head to toe leather. And it turns out it was Master Slave Weekend. What did I know? And I packed up my things and left. And that was the end of the boyfriend, because I really was not into that whole scene. It was shocking to me. But I did love the beach. I grew up near the beach. I now can't go to the beach because I've had skin cancer several times. So enjoy the sun. I hope you're wearing number 30 or 50 sunscreen. There wasn't sunscreen when I was a kid, so no beach for me anymore.
Yeah, no. Well, I'm sorry about, well, thank goodness you're on the other side of that. But no, I go to the dermatologist a lot and
Yes, I go every
try
six
to be
months.
proactive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Especially with my face. It's always SPF 70. Um, but
And you can
well,
see from my neck that it was no, I didn't. Yeah, no
yeah.
one can see this, thankfully. Yes, we're on the radio.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they can see it if it comes out as a social media clip, but I'm not sure if I'll put this that part out.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Or if they listen, if they watch us on Patreon. But I know you have a Patreon too. I want to plug with Making Gay History. You
I
get
do.
exclusive extra
Yes,
archival footage. Um,
archival and also contemporary interviews. I do new interviews for Patreon.
oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
And well, what I wanted to ask, I wanted to return to those who are out back to your CBS days. But how
yeah.
do you what do you think now? I mean, there's Sam Champion. I grew up in the Philly area. There's Adam Joseph,
Oh
who I
my God,
don't know if you
there
know,
are
but
so
there's so
many.
many faces. Anderson Cooper,
There are so
Andy
many.
Cohen.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
and most of them have no idea. Although some of them, like Anderson Cooper, stayed in the closet for a very long time. Robin Roberts did as well, because they had a good, and also Sam Champion. Were like, who didn't know Sam Champion was gay? With that hair, and this is terrible for me to say. I happen to have seen him making out with his boyfriend in St. Bart's at a hotel many years ago. Thinking, well, you're not doing a very good job of staying in the closet by doing that. And he was in the closet then. And also, why are you making out with your boyfriend in a public place like that? It's just, I'm my grandmother. It's like, that's not appropriate. There are places for making out, and that's not one of them. Um, I think it's great. I think it's great for this new generation that you can just be who you are and be on camera, and you can be a journalist. And it's not. I was one of the founding members of the National Lesbian Gay Journalists Association in the early '90s. There were no out journalists. It was too dangerous. You couldn't keep your job. There were out journalists who worked for gay publications, but not for mainstream publications. So I think it's great. And I will also admit to a bit of envy that it's the career I wanted but couldn't have. But then I couldn't have had the career that I had. And the career that I had is, to me, very meaningful. I've been very fortunate.
well,
I
that's what I was going to say is, do you have those in the public eye? I mean, you're in the public eye, but like, do you have those in the entertainment industry who've read your work, or would there be anyone surprising maybe to those listening that you really appreciated that they had looked up your work? Maybe it's even when you worked with the out athletes, like that intersection of a community.
um, there have been people who've written to me who are closeted, who are certainly appreciated my work. And years ago, I sent my third or fourth book. My third or fourth book I sent to Anderson Cooper when he was a young journalist, and I still have his handwritten note saying, "I wish I could do what you do and be out." I don't remember if I wrote back. I might have written back and said, "Well, you could," but it was years later. It was probably 20 years later that it came out. The piece that sometimes annoys me is that by the time Robin Roberts came out and Anderson Cooper, they were well established. The world had changed a lot, and Social Sam Champion. The stakes were much lower by the time they came out. But everyone, it's in everyone's time. I can't judge. I can, but I can't judge people for when they choose to come out. It's everyone's journey is different, and I simply could not live in the closet. It did not suit me. I'm a terrible liar, and I just hated it. So I have been out for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, so where do you see, what can you tease us about Making Gay History, your newer seasons? Like, where is Eric going with his current thirst for queer history?
Our next season is going to be about gay and lesbian people who are caught up in the Holocaust.
Oh,
We're doing there's very little material out there, but we're gonna make something out of what little is there. And we're doing it in partnership with the Fortune Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies, where I also produce a podcast. We have a season of that podcast coming out before the next Making Gay History season. The next Making Gay History season won't be out for a while. But for the Holocaust podcast, we have a new season coming out in September 21st. We're launching a 10-part audio documentary on the experience of Jews in the city of Vilna, Poland, before, during, and after World War II. It's now Vilnius, Lithuania, and we'll be launching the podcast in Vilnius, Lithuania. I'll be there in September. And it is draws on mostly testimony from survivors. There were somewhere between 55 and 60,000 Jews in Vilna, out of a population of 200,000, and just a few thousand survived. It is astonishing. If I say so myself, it's just an amazing 10-part series. So that's coming up next, and it's called, the series is called Those Who Were There, Voices from the Holocaust, and this season is called Remembering Vilna, the Jerusalem of Lithuania. So that's what's next. The big thing we have coming up is a huge education project with Making Gay History, but we're not going to announce it until it's finished, and we launch it next July. So stay tuned for that. It's a big national education program.
Yeah, I was wondering if there would be a documentary or something. Like I can see Making Gay History into even a TV serial in parts,
It would be
some type
terrific.
of
Yeah.
streaming program.
Yeah, I hope one day. Maybe, but the education project is something that will wind up in the classroom, and that's really important to me because kids just don't learn this, and so we're going to be providing what is needed to teach LGBTQ history in high school and middle school.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I'm sure you know Jake Newsome, who wrote Pink Triangle Legacies.
Yes.
Yes, he's been on. I'm a friend of his. So excited to hear what's coming up. September 21st is my birthday, actually.
Oh.
I mean, it's a sad topic that you're exploring, but
it's an important topic.
But it's very important. It's very important. And like you said, the history needs to be visible and heard.
Absolutely.
Which is what I love about all your work, Eric. So thank you so much. Where can everyone follow you on social media, your website?
Yeah, so you can find Making Gay History at makinggayhistory.com or wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Twitter, X, at Making Gay History, on Instagram, Making Gay History Podcast, on Facebook. We are everywhere. Everywhere. We're everywhere.
And I have everything in the show notes. So thank you, Eric. This was wonderful. And,
thank you for
bye to the
me.
listeners. Yeah, I hope to have you back again. Well, maybe especially with this educational program. I'd love to have you back.
I would love that. And I look forward very much to speaking about what we're doing once we've got it launched. Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye, Eric. Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby. I want to thank you so much for listening to the ITBR and TCIA episodes. Make sure, if you don't, follow, rate, and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Also, make sure you follow ITBR on TikTok and Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room and TCIA on TikTok and Instagram at True Crime and Academia. Also, we have a brand new Patreon membership system. So I just want to explain it to you all quickly. So if you want to become an ITBR student, it is $5 a month. You get ad-free ITBR and TCIA episodes and video interviews. If you want to become an ITBR professor for $10 a month, you get all of those ad-free benefits, but you also get access to both the ITBR and TCIA book clubs. You can join both book clubs, get ad-free episodes, plus you're going to get all of our extra video episodes. So I am rewatching Queer as Folk. Christian Garcia from That Old Gay Classic Cinema is joining us, and he's rewatching Smash. Mary is going to start to rewatch shows as well. You even get access to what I'm calling the ITBR Teaches. So if I'm recapping a movie or a TV show, including Barbie, Halloween movies and horror films, you get access to that as well. And then I also am offering consultation services. So for $30, you get your first initial consultation with me. It's a 1-hour private Zoom. I will help create your podcast, your media brand. How do you navigate academia as an undergrad or a grad student? Do you need help with technology? It could be teaching tools, Spotify for podcasters, video editor software. Do you want to expand your social media presence as an artist, writer, podcaster, or academic? Do you want help on how to create a public humanities identity like I've created for myself? So I'm offering that consultation service. You can find more info about it on Patreon. And you also can join our book clubs. If you want to just join the ITBR book club or the TCIA book club, you can do that for $4 a month. Patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. That is patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Thanks to the team, Mary DePippi, our chief contributor, and thank you to our 2 new interns from Stony Brook University, Jonathan and Sarah. Bye, everyone. Until next time.